Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Indegene's Digital Summit on leveraging AI solutions to help HCPs make better recommendations. My name is Vinod Badami, and I'm the Vice President for Data and Analytics at Indegene and the moderator for this panel. I trust everyone is doing well and is safe. This morning at the Indegene Digital Summit, we had Dr. Corinne Legault provide her perspective on how healthcare is going to change in this post-pandemic world. She highlighted the use of AI and its role in delivering better healthcare and helping us better manage our health outcomes. I have the honor today to moderate this panel with leaders from the industry who are in the thick of addressing how to leverage advanced predictive and learning solutions to enable better health outcomes. As you will see, they work for global pharma and are addressing these challenges and opportunities on a global scale. As we have seen over the last 18 months, life sciences companies have had to upend their traditional models and make way for new technology that replace face-to-face contact. Advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence came into more focus, and its promise was put to the test. Some of the broad areas that we will discuss on the panel today are the following. Why AI and why now? How relevant is it in today's environment? How to leverage AI and ML and advanced technologies to deliver targeted insights, and how to overcome key barriers to implement these solutions. To the audience, please enter your questions to the right of your screen, and we will take them on in the Q&A portion of this session. I would now like to take a few moments to introduce our panel. Ashish Sharma is the Executive Director of Data and Platforms, Commercial Effectiveness, US Pharma at Novartis. Welcome, Ashish. Arvind Balasundaram is the Executive Director of Commercial Insights and Analytics, Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Arvind. Ranjit Kumble is the Vice President of Scientific, Clinical Analytics, and Analytics Innovation with Pfizer Digital. Welcome, Arvind. Welcome, Ranjit. And Fernando Schwartz, the Global Head of Data Science at Merck. Welcome, Fernando. So with this, what we'd like to do is get started and get to the questions to the panelists. So first question, Arvind, comes to you. Much has been touted about ML being foundational to prediction of uncertain states. Where do you see this fitting in as far as where businesses are headed? Over to you, Arvind.
Thanks, Vinod, for that question. I just want to start off by taking the opportunity for thanking you and Indegene for hosting this and for having me on the panel. I think the question's a great one, and I want to go back to the keynote this morning, which is the uncertainties and what we're dealing with today with COVID and all of that. And what I would like to talk about and how it connects, in my view, to ML AI frameworks is the need in businesses. And I think this is true of any business, but more so in healthcare. And as a company at Regeneron, we're bang in the middle of a pandemic with our cocktail, is what I would call the need to construct possible futures. And I deliberately use that term because I think businesses have significantly evolved in the expectations they have of what kind of information and intelligence they expect from their data. And we used to be in a situation where, we could get away with probabilities. And what I mean by that again is, there would be several states that could pan out or happen in the future, and we would allocate some kind of probability to every state, and we would use things like, Markov methods and things of that nature to figure out, okay, what is the probability we'll get to state A versus state B? Very elegant, very conceptually nice. The biggest dilemma that I think that has happened here is that all assumes that the states you're talking about are steady, which they refuse to be these days, as we are learning in COVID. And so to be approaching data with that same framework is no longer viable. COVID in and of itself has also forced businesses to now demand what I would call possibilities. So they want to know not what is probable, but what is possible. And I think the confluence of these expectations with the volumes of data that we have, the technology and analytical frameworks we have in ML and AI has actually allowed us to kind of pursue this differently. And what I would like to talk about is where ML and AI can actually help address this, right? So if what they can really do, in my view, is ML and AI enable data to be, take it from being observed passively or just being seen and observing patterns of association to possibly imagining what a state can be like. And we've been actually doing some of that through the COVID evolution, as I'm sure most of my fellow panelists have, right? And this involves using very new ways of looking at data streams and looking for patterns. For example, counterfactual logic. I know I'm getting a little technical here, but let me explain what that is. Before we would essentially look at, if X happened, did Y happen? We've even moved it beyond that to say, hey, you know what, if I did something to X, does something happen to Y? Now what we would like to do with ML and AI is actually push that logic a little further and say, was it X that actually caused Y? And if X did not happen, would Y just not have existed? Now that you have the volumes of data and you have ML and AI and pattern searching algorithms, there's a much more intelligent way to explore these uncertainties. They add information and intelligence, I think, in a very novel way that address the question that I started with, which is, can we start identifying scenarios that actually might be possible? And this is also happening beyond COVID. In our business now, with disruptions happening at the rate at which they are, I think change and uncertainty in itself has become faster. And so the expectation out of data and ML and AI has also changed. And so that's what I wanted to really say in reference to that question.
Got it, Arvind. Thank you. Thank you very much. And, especially some of the terms that you use, which is construction of the future. And, that is what I know many people are interested in hearing more about. I wanted to open this up to the panel and maybe just get your thoughts on the question, as well as, maybe some thoughts on what Arvind also mentioned. So would someone like to start? Ashish, Fernando, Ranjit?
Yeah, I actually like the way, Arvind, you put it up. I was just looking at how it's been evolving. Actually, if you just look at, there are so many game-changing technologies that have been coming into this space. And I was reviewing how many algorithms that are AI-based algorithms that have been approved recently by FDA. There were like 12 of them that caught my eye. And I was pretty impressed. There's something called DreamEd, which supports like diabetes treatment decisioning, or there was a Viz AI. It's basically validate what, Arvind, you were saying, that at the end of the day, it's moving really fast. You do need to be cautious of how do you, so first, these approval of algorithms by FDA is a testament of, what's happening in the industry. But if I just double click on that, I see that AI ML, or at least artificial intelligence in some form or shape, has existed really, really long time. But converting that into commercialization has started to take up in a really big way. And while ML algorithms have existed forever, now that whole platform configuration that goes with it, or data collection that goes with it, or feature extraction, and at a very industrial scale through an automation is happening. So with that, I think it's all coming together. And especially in pharma industry, we see tons of investment going in that scaling in all those 10 different constituents, which brings AI ML at scale. So that's what I would like to pass it on to Fernando.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Kind of you read my face there. Great predictive skills on your side. Yeah, I was thinking about the answer that Arvind gave, and also what you mentioned, Ashish. And I see that when you're thinking about technologies like the ones that Arvind mentioned about sort of causality, right? I think in my mind, what sort of pops up is clinical trials, and how the different sort of regulatory agencies have different standards. And so when you're thinking about approving medications or therapies, indications in the US, and then moving outside the US to like the Europe, right? And you look at the standards that are used for these bodies, they differ quite a bit. And so I mean, it's generally perceived as getting approval in the US is easier than getting approval, let's say, in the European Union. And so it makes you wonder if the use of technologies like the one that were mentioned by Arvind around causality would allow the pharma industry to use, say, synthetic control arms and the like, right? Technologies that are able to kind of play. I mean, once they get the right legitimacy, right, in approval in regulatory agencies, maybe this is a way to try to use sort of real world data to get into sort of clinical evidence for trials outside of what is currently the US, for example. So, I mean, I think that the possibilities are quite interesting in that space.
Good. Thank you, Fernando. Thanks, Ashish, for that. And Ranjit, any thoughts from your side on this?
Just a quick follow-up to Arvind's point about the uncertain states and sort of how the paradigm used to be thinking in very static terms, very known sort of paradigms. What we are also seeing is just that with the ability of machine intelligence capabilities, identifying leading indicators of some type of oncoming change or upcoming change is much, much more powerful, given that we can explore this very vast space of signals much, much more efficiently. Now, exactly how the state is going to change, we have to keep watching and figuring out. But I would say that the ability to spot signals quickly and anticipate upcoming changes is much more powerful now. So much more to go in terms of developing really robust capabilities, but promising early paths in terms of comparing to what we used to have to do in terms of really looking at the world through very known sets of lenses, sort of figuring out how changes are occurring and how they'll evolve. Very powerful in that respect.
Got it. Thank you, Ranjit. So, starting off with that overview and, getting the panel's view on that, let's move on to the next question. And this one goes to Ashish. Ashish, given your experience in various industries, what has been your experience in the value of AI and advanced technologies, and have they met their promise? Over to you, Ashish.
Sure. So if I look back, even my master's thesis was around AI ML. We used Lisp and ADA at that time and Prolog to do prediction for an airline that what is the likelihood of a customer repeating for that airline. And some of you who are from South Asia might remember there was an airline which came and gone called East West. And I did that for them. And I don't think AI ML we did all these projects, but it never really took off in a very large scale, right? But if I look back last 5 to 6 years, the journey has been picking up, at least in pharma. And if I go back post 9/11, it took in a really big way, at least in the sector. I was in anti-terrorism consulting at that time. So we used it heavily for taking all public chatter and converting that into whatever, precipitating all the threats up for different languages, automating all kind of slangs into converting into a threat word or not. So I think it has been definitely delivering on the promised land. Probably most of the initial projects underestimated what it would took to deliver these outcomes. Initially, I remember most of the projects went 10 times more in budget and time. Nobody knew how noisy this could be and how much we have to spend, invest. But talking specifically in pharma, I would say that journey has started in a very small feat. I would say EMR, EHR data, recognizing a pattern for identifying future patient population, that kind of use cases are working at scale. I've been part of few, or taking more at the data management level, like what Arvind was talking about, is data enrichment and auto stewardship for MDM, for your other type of data cleansing has been working. Since COVID, social media has become really prevalent. So there's quite a lot you can draw out of that. And the moment you touch social media, you're talking AI ML to filter a lot of noise. But if I talk specifically on customer conversion or identification, one thing that I saw interesting was around predictions for physician conversion, where we took basically campaign data, formulary, and payer data to predict what is the likelihood of physician writing more or less, given those three attributes changing. And there was quite a lot of learning training that happened. So I see that dynamic targeting or segmentation, targeting classification, these are normal use cases that we all have been seeing over the last few years. And they are delivering to a certain extent, depending on what your calibrated expectation out of that is, because machine is a machine, requires training. In my experience, I've seen that 2 years, minimum 12 to 18 iterative training sessions to the data start to change your accuracy from maybe 50% to 93% at the most. And then it becomes a moot point that do you want to invest more money taking it from 93% accuracy to 100% or just leave it at that? So I think those are my three takeaways. That one, other industries started picking up post 9/11. There was a need driven in that security space, which took up by all CPG and finance. And now pharma has taken the same bandwagon in the last 5 years. A lot of use cases around the ones I described. And then how calibrated your expectation of the outcome is, we are landing there. I do see that there is good applicability at scale that's happening.
Got it. Thank you, Ashish. And one of the things, in this morning's session by Dr. Corinne Legoff, as well as in the keynote yesterday in the morning, it was mentioned that, with these different data silos that are there, organizations are looking at building, a longitudinal view of patient data, right? And then trying to make sense out of it. So I wanted to kind of take, the information you just spoke about, Ashish, and open it up to the panel to see how they see, this information about patient information coming together, creating the longitudinal view, and providing HCPs with that information, being able to crunch the large amounts of data and really help them deliver better recommendations. Any thoughts or views on that? We'll open it up to the panel. Fernando, if you want to kick it off.
Sure, I'll be happy to comment, but I don't want to get it in front of anyone. So please, if anybody wants to say something. One of the points that, so in my experience prior working at Merck, I was working at a startup based in New York that harnessed the power of clinical lab data. And so we had records on what at the time was a massive amount of data, around 200 million people in the US. We have a repository of clinical lab data, which was stitched longitudinally. And so when you try to do that, with the resources that are available at a pharma company's hands, you run into some legal barriers. And even at that company as well, but there are some legal barriers that revolve around privacy. And I think that when you start digging into that privacy world, pharma companies seem kind of ill-prepared to deal with privacy at that level. So when you're talking about patient data, how do you handle patient data? I think that's a big area where, an opportunity to really sort of grow in terms of privacy, of handling the data again, because what you're thinking about there, I mean, just to throw it to the group and not just to monopolize this, that the issue with privacy is there's always this balance between utility and privacy. So the more private the data is, the less information it carries. And so where do you put the needle, right, between privacy and utility? This is a really interesting question that I think is an area that's worth exploring, because as you say, the only way we're going to be able to make long-term predictions is to understanding that longitudinal record, and that's built by stitching disparate pieces of data. So how do you do that in a legal way? It's super interesting, in my opinion.
I would like to add to what Fernando just mentioned. So Fernando, I'm seeing a pattern in the industry, and it goes back to, I think around 2017-18, I was part of a project where we took similarly EMR, EHR data around breast cancer data sets and started to identify some kind of a pattern that when the diagnosis code and symptoms written in the physician and nurse's notes have some kind of a causality, that when these certain terms are mentioned or key phrases and keywords in the notes, do they land to a diagnosis code? And if yes, there's a pattern to it, then how can you train the data to go on undiagnosed patient population data and try to flag them? And there were a lot of legal and compliance around it. And the way to mitigate that, at least at that time, was that you come to a data fabric where there are multiple data sets coming together, but they're in their own separate tenant. They're logically separated, use all common features and products of data processing, but they're in their own logical silos. And depending on what your persona is, what you're allowed to connect the dots between, you are able to, because physically it's all on the same place. So your commercial, patient, digital, medical data is all come together on the same data fabric. But I haven't seen that scaling as much because it requires a different level of investment and time.
Yeah, Ashish, I want to just add to what you're saying. I think, both what you and Fernando are saying is really where nirvana is, right? Is in the augmentation of intelligence that we want. And if we can stretch it beyond numbers and text and get into, lab images and rich media, the whole works. But then you run into this very noisy domain of what you're talking about, which is, does the text actually make sense to the diagnosis, or is there an influence of extraneous, things like habit and mandated require. So there's a lot of noise in, even if we were to get to that patch of all the different streams of data, I think that's going to be an area which could either hinder or facilitate the evolution of what we're doing now from a more mechanical process kind of thing with ML/AI to true augmentation of intelligence. And I think most other industries have run into this privacy requirement. I think we're going to have to confront it. For example, in diseases, genetic information, if one had access to it across a population, could lead to very meaningful novel assessments of risk and appropriateness of medicines for that risk pool. We're unable to cross that barrier because of privacy considerations, right? So I think this will be debated, but I think it's a great point and right on the nose.
And I think even in addition to the privacy, which is a critical point, even on a smaller scale, when privacy requirements can be fully addressed, there is still also the cautionary fact that due to disparities in the healthcare system, the data sets are not necessarily representative. And as we set up and train predictive algorithms, needing to know exactly where the representational gaps are becomes critical for equitable implementation of solutions and healthcare. And so that becomes a really second critical part, which even if when the privacy requirements are addressed, is an equally important and very difficult to fully account for issue as well. But what makes it really worthwhile is, I think, just coming quickly to the question of promise, one of the things that these capabilities have opened up, at least to me, has been just the ability to look very multidimensionally at situations, look at combinations of, for example, diagnoses and medical histories on a scale that wasn't possible before, to come up with a much more holistic view of what creates total risk versus previous models that looked at single factors univariately or small scale multivariate models. The scale on which we can look at dimensionality is much greater now, which makes it worth really trying to solve these issues, tackle them and solve them definitively.
And Ranjit, sorry, was there a question?
No, I was just saying, Ranjit, what you said, very interesting, because when I was dealing with that breast cancer scenario of EMRs, EHR, we had to really struggle to find the right training data. And I was surprised to find out that University of Utah or SNPDA or NIH had actually pretty robust data on different type of unique variants to train. So we had to work with these 5-6 different data sets to do that. So I'm guessing that by topic, by therapeutic area, probably tons of training data sets will be getting created that we just need to be aware of and then start to leverage probably to train.
Absolutely.
This is great, and it's a perfect segue into the question coming to you, Ranjit. As you said, it looks like the path to, if I can call it AI nirvana, is not easy and simple, right? So there are barriers to adoption, and how can these be addressed? What, in your experience, what is the best way to not try to get to the nirvana, but get to a place where this is really going to deliver value to the organization?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Vinod, and thank you also for the opportunity to participate here. So in terms of the barriers, I mean, I would say if we think about the adoption process, the first question around, is there excitement? Is there receptivity to explore how machine intelligence can help decision makers in life sciences? I would say that there's no barrier there. There's just a tremendous amount of interest and receptivity at all stages of the value chain. So all the way from sort of earlier stages of trying to figure out which molecules may be most promising in early discovery, through optimizing trials, commercializing new therapies, improving outcomes. A lot of interest and excitement. I think the question then becomes the next step, once recommendations are developed at any of those stages, really adopting and actioning on them. I'd say a couple of considerations. First, just like any form of analytics, I think findings really have to be provided within the right context. And so, the basis for the recommendations has to be clear, has to be understandable and explainable. And I think when you think about the complexity of the types of problems we're approaching with AI and machine learning across the industry, that really requires the domain expertise, whether we're talking about scientific, clinical, medical, or commercial, to really be infused with that whole development process from the earliest stages. And sort of learning cycles have to be much faster than they traditionally were. In the traditional analytics model, it's been more sequential. Analytics results are reviewed by domain experts who will vet or reject, and it's this sequential process. Here, just given the complexity, it has to happen sort of in real time together, co-developing, co-creating, right? So that was one observation, is just the necessity of that domain context and the speed of the learning cycles. I think the second area, which also is relevant for general analytics, but even more so for AI and machine learning, is the scale of impact. The traditional life sciences analytics model has been very bespoke and custom in terms of how recommendations are developed. And of course, every company is progressing beyond that, but it is a rate limiter in terms of how much impact can be had. And so, at the right point of maturity, machine intelligence capabilities have to be standardized and scaled, with that goal to make direct access possible for decision makers, so they get recommendations when they need them and they don't have to depend on people or processes, custom processes. So those are a couple of important considerations. I think the topic is a rich one. We could definitely spend a lot more time on it, but I'll pause there. Would love to hear from my colleagues on the panel, and hope that those sort of initial points were helpful.
Absolutely. Arvind, would you like to kick off the...
Yeah, I think, thanks, Vinod. I think Ranjit summed it up really well. And the only piece I would add to what he was saying, speaking more to the future evolution of how ML and AI advances. I think in all companies, not just the ones we represent, but in all industries, I think there needs to be an open-mindedness of the additional requirements that are going to be necessary from a talent perspective, from a financial investment perspective, to really take this data and intelligence to that next level of intelligence, right, to where Ranjit was saying. So I think a lot of that messaging has already started to happen. I'm sure all of us are doing it. I think as an industry, we need to do it. As a partnership with folks such as yourself, we need to do it, because otherwise we risk kind of spending too much time on the frivolous, ML AI outputs and not really advancing this to what should really be adopted to get the true insights. So that's the only piece. I think Ranjit referred to it. I'm just going to hammer it more because I'm sure that's a need everywhere.
Absolutely. Fernando, Ashish, any thoughts on this?
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
No, I was saying, do you want to go first? I would like to hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, I so as someone that has worked in sort of this topic outside of pharma industry, I used to work in advertising, online advertisement, right? So I think here's one of the barriers to adoption is the expectations that we have. Here's why I'm saying this is because, sort of Google, Facebook get away with so much machine learning, right? They like when you open your feed, you see the ads of the stuff that you yourself didn't know you wanted, right? This company's AI knows you better than you know yourself. And so in a sense, I think that the expectation is that the same will happen in healthcare. But the truth is that, this is harder. So when you're trying to capture or to sort of leverage this technology to capture intent, which is what Facebook, Google wants to do. They capture, it's a very short-lived thing, right? So you see someone walking by, you like their sneakers, you start thinking, oh, I want those sneakers. And if you don't see an ad for that in 30 seconds, then you'll forget about it and that's it. But if you see the right ad, with 40% discount, you're going for that, right? And that's it. It's a very short-lived emotion. Healthcare, on the contrary, sort of depends on that longitudinal sort of view of a patient life, and whatever happened to you 2 years ago in terms of purchasing doesn't really matter today, but in terms of healthcare, yes, it does, right? What you do, your choices last year, last 2 years, last 5 years are really important today. Your comorbidities, your habits, right? And so I think that inherently the problem is more difficult. Deploying successful machine learning models in healthcare is harder than doing that in the consumer environment. But it's hard to see that until you try to do it, right? So there, I think that I would say that the barrier to adoption is that expectation that things will work as easily and as quickly as they do in other domains. You got to kind of fasten your seatbelt, and it's a bumpy ride. So I would add that to what was said.
Nice. I was smiling with the bumpy ride and the fasten your seatbelt. So I think what Fernando, you're saying, I would translate that to ROI calculation for AI ML in pharma, because unlike CPG, retail, or advertising, there is no instant results you can show. That look, you ran this campaign, it was driven by AI ML, it was driven by predictability, and I got you so many customers. That or traffic was different, right? Here, there's no instant gratification. There is a very long cycle of actually seeing those results. What you do today as a next best action suggestion, it takes 18 to 20 weeks before you start to see actually a lift in your engagement or revenue or anything. So my take on this topic is that consider calculating AI ML ROI and also calibrate expectations of the organization in pharma that based on your digital maturity or competitive advantage or brand equity or your overall delivery speed, or there are many factors that can impact that outcome delay. But overall, think beyond ML algorithms helping a lift. Think of your data collection, think of your data validation, or your consumption infrastructure, or your platform configuration, or your process management, or your alerting through these AI ML. There are a lot of use cases that will help you show ROI in data engineering space, in business analytics space, above and beyond data science, where we are all looking. And none of them are going to show you an instant dollar in pharma. So create the art of ROI calculation through a very calibrated expectation in the areas that impacts the most, and then present that as a roadmap, and probably your organization will be more open to more investments.
That is great. And, it's, again, an excellent segue into the question coming to you, Fernando. We've talked about barriers, we've talked about the opportunity, and I know that there is an audience out there that is kind of sitting there and listening, saying, okay, so this is great. Now, how do I plan the roadmap, to kind of implement data science? So what is your recommendations to organizations taking their first step in this space, right? How should they plan, and what should their roadmap look like?
Thank you so much, Vinod. And I guess since now you directed the question to me, I get a chance to thank you for organizing this wonderful panel and inviting me as well without, just giving other answers. Yeah, I mean, this, again, like it was mentioned before, this kind of question, I mean, we could just like go on an offsite and, spend a long time answering this question. And the reason to that is that because I think that, in all fairness, no one's figured this one out. We're all trying to do this, but machine learning, as it was mentioned before, has been around for quite some time. But the conjunction of the technology readiness, the data, and the right people is sort of just kind of happening in pharma industry. So we're all sort of trying to figure out how do we do that. So I don't think that there's like a magic bullet here that tells you, hey, these are the 5 steps and you're done, right? With that said, of course, you can try to see like where things work and where things don't work, and maybe collect some small sample evidence, right? And try to see what you can do about that. And in my experience so far, what I can tell you is that, I mean, you can always sort of, when you're tackling this kind of problems, you can break it down into like strategic and tactical pieces to it, right? So from a strategic point of view, how do you prepare your organization to succeed deploying machine learning and data science? And you can think of this, well, you have, again, maybe you sort of break into this typical sort of organization, people, technology, right? So from an organizational point of view, where does the data science, like maybe in the commercial, let's just stick with commercial for the time being, because that's kind of the newer. Of course, if you think about like research areas, those are more natural candidates, and probably we're all working there. But in the commercial space, so where does data science land, right? Is that an IT function? Is that like a business function? Is it somewhere in the middle? That's one of the questions they need to ask, right? It's going to be the leadership that's going to dictate that, right? But in the case of Merck, it lands, within the business side of things. But then you can't do it without IT. So like from an organization point of view, strong partnerships within IT and business figure out where these functions should land. Again, similarly, from a technological point of view, you want to be able to enable this to happen. So you got to bring in IT and then legal to understand that. And from a people point of view, I mean, the obvious question, right? The obvious point, you need the right talent. You need people that understand how this is done. And so maybe I'll just give a quick example of just a little nugget there on this last point, that how we're tackling this. So identifying talent is a difficult thing, because a couple of years ago it was said that data science is the sexiest job out there, right? So that means that a lot of people want to get into data science, but you want to kind of try to understand where is the talent that you need, and how do you get to it. And so one thing that I did was to set up what we call this case study. So this case study was like a pretty interesting evaluation that we would give to candidates that were going to be joining the team in the specific area, right? And this one I used my background in academia. I I was working in academia for a while, so I work with HR and legal, and we crafted a really sort of neat little sort of case study that we would give candidates to the roles to be able to really assess how fit they were for the jobs. And when we did that, we found that there's like a really interesting white space there, an opportunity to acquire sort of high caliber individuals that would otherwise go to tech firms and whatnot. So again, the question is again, could stay. We could talk for this for a long time. I'm trying to be mindful of time here, but I would say think of this from a strategic and tactical point of view. Think about the people, the organization, and the technology. And one example of what we did was like in the people point of view, we really got pretty specific around understanding what is the talent that we needed to get ahead with this.
Got it. I wanted to ask the panelists, given that we are a few minutes into the Q&A session, would love to get your view on what Fernando said, but is it okay if we just go to a question from the audience?
Yeah, okay. I think that would be great, Vinod.
Okay, great. So here is a question. Given everything that the panel has talked about and the maturity level that we are at today with AI, how effective and valuable do you think the next best action solution is, which is being promoted so heavily in the market, right? What is the benefits of it, and has it really proven itself in terms of brand marketing teams and other teams within commercial really gaining value from it? So just wanted to open that up. Arvind, do you want to take the first shot at that?
Yeah, and I think this question was answered quite nicely and I think Ashish may have actually specifically referred to this, but we have to always contextualize it as being a run versus a marathon, right? And if you don't complete that first mile, you ain't ever going to make the marathon. And so next best actioning to me is, yes, it's very pertinent, it's very useful. For various reasons. One is it's promotes continuous learning and refinement of stuff that we keep sending out to the field or wherever. It's also dynamic and real time, and not the way we would like it often, but it's great, and it helps localize strategy, which again in this day and age in our industry is necessary. So we don't work off very aggregate type metrics. So my response would be, yes, we can refine it more and more, but I like where we're going with it. So I'll stop with that.
Vinod, yeah. I would say, for me, next best action is more of a behavioral change. And it depends on whether the party consuming the next best action suggestions, how much do they really trust what we are telling them to do? And that will drive the action, and that will drive the change in behavior. So the way I see it is that it can vary from geography to personas to the brand and the therapeutic area, and also the culture. Depending on that how sales team has been run, that next best action adoption could be different, hence the results. That's one thing I notice very clearly, that in different industry, next best action has been there for quite some time. Starting from my own career of anti-terrorism consulting, if you're negotiating with some group, you are given a lot of suggestions on your screen that press these buttons to get this action from whomsoever you are negotiating at that time. But then you make a lot of those micro decisions on the spot based on what do you trust, what do you not. And same thing happens in a sales rep's mind. When they are given a Viva suggestion or a next best action suggestion from an algorithm, it's all depending on whether they are willing to have that change of the behavioral change action. Am I going to trust this, or I'm going to trust my gut? So closer that becomes to being able to trust or adopt it, the higher change in behavior you will see. And that factor depends on how well we are able to train and have a feedback loop. And more you train, that gap starts to become closer. That's my take on it. I'll pass it on to Ranjit.
Sure, I think I agree with Arvind in that the direction is the right one. Progress is good. I think early findings are very positive. I think what I definitely see is the shift, the use of this next best action approach is really shifting the thinking to personalizing and really trying to understand the person engaged to a much deeper level than has been possible when the approach is broader. But I think it's also the same requirement around the action needing some kind of a narrative, some type of some context to your point, Ashish, about whether or not the person accepting the recommendation chooses to or not. And so that to me is a big dependency of how much more successful the approach will be. It needs the context, it needs the explainability.
Got it. And Fernando, would you be able to wind it up?
I think there's like a sliver of an answer here that hasn't been covered, but I mean, I think that the change management piece associated to whatever comes out is paramount. But there is one piece here that may also be addressed is that, I mean, if you think about it, like do like a back of the envelope calculation, right? You have around, let's say, just throw some numbers, right? 2 million HCPs in the US, maybe, add, a few more million across the world, you want to reach to them 5 times a week. We're talking about making 100 million decisions a week, roughly, or, give or take, right? If you want to have a global outreach. So if you look from that lens and you think about, hey, do you want help making 100 million decisions a week? Do you want this to be rules-based? Do you want to sort of use some degree of intelligence in that, right? Personalization and intelligence. So, I mean, I think that the answer should be, of course, we want machines in the mix because no one can make 100 million decisions a week, right? The question is, again, how do you make sure that they're helping you scrape that value that you want? But I think that from a purely sort of, if you want, math perspective, this is kind of prime machine learning territory here because of just the throughput of this kind of question.
Got it. Folks, we are at time. And as I think each of you said, this is a discussion that can go on for much longer. This topic is really of interest to everyone. And when we took a topic poll before the Digital Summit started, we found that this was one topic that was really trending at the top. But Fernando Schwartz, Ashish Sharma, Arvind Balasundaram, Ranjit Kumble, thank you so much for joining the session today. Your insights and views were really valuable. And I know the audience is kind of hoping to get more questions, but we are at time. So thank you very much and hope to see you next time. Goodbye. Thank you to the audience for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vin.